They whispered, "She's not even family," right in front of me at Grandpa's will reading. Everyone laughed. But when the lawyer called my name to take the main chair, their faces went white, and the cameras caught everything. Hi, I'm Madison. Before I tell you how I went from family embarrassment to owning everything they wanted, hit subscribe if you've ever felt invisible in your own family. Trust me, by the end of this story, you'll understand why speaking up for yourself isn't selfish, it's survival. I grew up in the Carter family, where being second best wasn't just a feeling, it was a fact. My older brother Derek, 35 now, was the golden child from the moment he was born. Dr. Derek, successful Derek. Derek, who could do no wrong. And then there was me, Madison, the daughter who chose graphic design over medical school, the one who worked with computers instead of saving lives. My parents, Richard and Patricia Carter, had a way of introducing us that made the hierarchy crystal clear. At dinner parties, country club events, even random encounters at the grocery store, it was always the same script. "This is Derek, our son. He's a surgeon at Presbyterian Hospital." Then, after a long pause, almost like an afterthought, "And this is Madison. She works with computers." The ellipsis in that sentence said everything: the hesitation, the disappointment, the silent wish that I could have been something more impressive to mention at their social gatherings. But there was one person who never made me feel like a consolation prize. My grandfather, William Carter. While my parents measured success in degrees and salaries, Grandpa measured it in character. He'd built Carter Holdings from nothing, a small manufacturing company that grew into a multi-million-dollar enterprise. But he never let the money define him, or us. "Madison," he used to tell me during our Sunday visits, "your parents mistake noise for substance. Derek's loud, you're deep, there's a difference." My family saw those Sunday visits as Grandpa playing favourites. I saw them as the only place I could breathe without apologising for my existence. Let me take you back 6 years. I was 22, standing in a graduation robe that felt 3 sizes too big, waiting for my name to be called. I'd just earned my degree in design with honours, outstanding graduate of the entire program. The dean himself had mentioned my thesis project in his speech. I scanned the auditorium for my parents. They'd promised they'd be there. "We wouldn't miss it for the world, sweetheart," Mom had said on the phone 2 days before. But as I walked across that stage, as I shook hands and accepted my diploma, as the photographer captured what should have been a family moment, I was alone. The seats I'd reserved were empty. After the ceremony, I stood with my professors for photos. They congratulated me, told me I had a bright future. I smiled until my cheeks hurt. When I finally made it to the parking lot, I called home. Dad picked up. "Oh, honey, we couldn't make it. Derek had an important surgery this morning, and your mother and I wanted to be there to support him. You understand, right? Your graduation ceremony is just walking across a stage. Derek was literally saving someone's life. Just walking across a stage. 4 years of work, countless all-nighters, a thesis that professors said should be published, all reduced to just walking across a stage." "Did he save them?" I asked quietly. "What? The patient? Did Derek save them?" "Well, yes, of course. He's an excellent surgeon." "Good. I'm glad someone's life got saved today." I hung up before he could respond. I drove home alone, my diploma in the passenger seat where my mother should have been sitting. When I got to my apartment, I called Grandpa. "Congratulations, Madison," he said, his voice warm even through the phone. "Outstanding graduate. I knew you would be." You knew?" "Your dean sent me the program. I would have been there myself if this damn hip allowed it." "But I'm having something delivered to you." Should be there any minute." 20 minutes later, a delivery driver showed up with an enormous bouquet of sunflowers, my favourite, and a framed photograph. It was a picture of me as a little girl, sitting on Grandpa's lap, both of us laughing at something long forgotten. The frame was engraved, "To Madison, who never needed permission to shine. Love, Grandpa." I cried for an hour. Not because I was sad, but because someone had shown up for me, even when they couldn't physically be there. 3 years later, Thanksgiving became another lesson in where I stood in the family hierarchy. The Carter family Thanksgiving was always held at my parents' house in Westchester. It was a production. Mom spent weeks planning the menu. Dad imported wine from some vineyard he'd read about in a magazine. And Derek and his wife Ashley always arrived with designer pies from that bakery in Manhattan that had a 3-month waiting list. I showed up with a homemade apple cranberry tart. I'd spent 3 hours making it from scratch, using Grandpa's mother's recipe that he'd handwritten for me on an index card years ago. When I walked into the dining room, I immediately noticed the setup. The main table was elaborately decorated, fine china, crystal glasses, fresh flower centerpieces. Derek and Ashley sat at the head, flanking my parents like royalty holding court. Then there was the kids' table, literally a folding table set up in the corner with plastic plates and paper napkins. My 13-year-old cousin sat there, and apparently so did I. "Madison, honey, we thought you'd be more comfortable over there," Mom said when she saw my confused expression. "The main table is a bit crowded this year, and we wanted to make sure Derek and Ashley had enough space. You understand." I understood perfectly. I was 25 years old with a thriving freelance design business, but I ranked below my teenage cousin in the family pecking order. I sat down at the folding table without a word. My cousin looked at me sympathetically. "This is weird, right?" he whispered. "Very weird," I whispered back. When it came time for dessert, I brought out my tart. I'd wrapped it carefully, kept it temperature controlled in my car, made sure the lattice crust stayed perfect. I set it on the counter next to Ashley's designer pies. "Oh, Madison made something," Mom said, her tone implying that a bomb had been discovered in the kitchen. "That's sweet, but let's have Ashley's pies. They're from Buttercup Bakery. Do you know how hard it is to get these?" I stood there, holding my homemade tart like an idiot. "Mum, I spent 3 hours. Just put it over there, dear." She waved dismissively toward the kids' table. "I'm sure the children will enjoy it." That's when Grandpa stood up. He was 85 years old with a bad hip, but he pushed himself out of his chair with the authority of someone who'd built empires. "Madison spent 3 hours making that dessert using my mother's recipe," he said, his voice cutting through the chit-chat. "The recipe she asked me for specifically, the recipe I wrote down for her because she cared enough to preserve family tradition. We're having Madison's tart first." The room went silent. Mum's face turned red. Dad studied his wineglass like it contained the secrets of the universe. Derek and Ashley exchanged uncomfortable glances. Grandpa walked over to me, took the tart, and carried it to the main table himself. He cut the first slice, put it on his plate, and took a deliberate bite. "Best damn dessert I've had in years," he announced. "Madison, come sit by me. Richard, move over." I sat next to Grandpa at the main table, while my father reluctantly scooted his chair. No one said much after that. We ate the tart in thick, uncomfortable silence, but for once I wasn't the one feeling uncomfortable. On the drive home that night, Grandpa called me. "You don't need them to recognize your worth, Madison," he said. "They're so busy polishing Derek's ego, they can't see they've got a diamond sitting in the corner being treated like coal." "Sometimes I think they wish I'd never been born," I admitted. "Then they're fools. and you don't need fools' opinions to define your life. But the moment that truly broke me happened a year ago, the moment that showed me once and for all that I would never be more than an afterthought in my own family. I was driving home from a client meeting when a delivery truck ran a red light. I didn't even see it coming. The impact spun my car into a pole. I woke up in the ambulance with a paramedic telling me I'd fractured my right arm, my drawing arm, in 3 places. They took me to Mercy General. As they wheeled me into the ER, all I could think about was calling my parents. I was 27 years old, but in that moment I just wanted my mum. The nurse handed me my phone. I dialed with my left hand, my right arm screaming in pain despite the drugs. "Hello?" Dad answered, background noise suggesting he was at some kind of event. "Dad, I was in an accident. I'm at Mercy General. I fractured my arm and, oh honey, that's terrible. But we're at Derek's charity gala right now. He's being honoured for his volunteer work. Can this wait?" Can this wait? I was in a hospital bed, drugged up on painkillers, my career potentially destroyed, and he was asking if it could wait. "Dad, I'll tell your mother you called. She'll check in tomorrow. Feel better, sweetheart." He hung up. I lay there staring at the fluorescent lights, feeling something inside me crack that had nothing to do with broken bones. I was alone. I was always alone. 2 hours later, I heard a commotion in the hallway. Then Grandpa walked in, moving faster than I'd seen him move in years, his face pale with worry. "Madison." He grabbed my good hand. "I came as soon as I heard." "How did you—" "The hospital called me. You still have me listed as emergency contact from when you were in college, remember?" I'd forgotten about that. It was a small thing I'd done 6 years ago, never thinking it would matter. But here he was, 86 years old, driving 2 hours in the dark because someone needed to show up for me. "You didn't have to come," I said, tears streaming down my face. "It's just a broken arm." "There's no such thing as just anything when it comes to you," he said firmly. "Your parents are idiots for not being here, but I'm here. I'll always be here." He stayed with me through the entire night. When they admitted me for surgery the next morning, he was still in the chair beside my bed, having refused to leave. When they finally discharged me 2 days later, he drove me home, helped me set up my apartment for one-armed living, and stocked my fridge with groceries. "Grandpa," I said as he was leaving, "why do they hate me so much?" He turned around, and for the first time I saw tears in his eyes. "They don't hate you, Madison. They just don't know how to love someone who doesn't fit their script. You weren't supposed to be an artist. You weren't supposed to be quiet and thoughtful. You were supposed to be loud and ambitious like Derek. When you turned out to be yourself instead, they didn't know what to do with you. But you knew what to do with me. Because I saw you, the real you, not the person I wanted you to be." He kissed my forehead. "You don't need them to validate your existence, Madison. You just need to stop waiting for permission to live." That conversation happened 14 months ago. 3 months ago, Grandpa had a massive heart attack. By the time I got the call, he was already gone. I found out from Derek, of all people. He texted me, "Grandpa died, funeral arrangements pending." That was it. No phone call, no, "I'm sorry." Just a text message delivered like a weather update. I was at a coffee shop when I read it. I dropped my phone. The cup shattered on the tile floor. The barista asked if I was okay. I couldn't answer. I couldn't breathe. I drove to the hospital anyway, even though Derek's text made it clear Grandpa was already gone. Maybe I needed to see it for myself. Maybe I needed to say goodbye. When I got to the ICU, I saw them through the glass doors. Mom, Dad, and Derek, standing around Grandpa's bed, having what looked like a serious conversation. Derek was already on his phone, probably calling the funeral home or the lawyer or someone who could handle logistics. I pushed through the doors. I need to see him. Mom turned around, her expression annoyed, like I'd interrupted something important. Madison, not now. We're handling things. He was my grandfather too. We know that, but there are decisions to be made, medical decisions, legal decisions, things that require family. The word hit me like a slap. Family, as if I wasn't part of it. Let me see him, I said again, my voice breaking. Please. Dad sighed. Madison, your grandfather needs peace right now. We don't need emotional scenes. This isn't the time for drama. I just want to say goodbye. You can say goodbye at the funeral like everyone else, Derek said, not even looking up from his phone. Right now we need space, professional space. Mom gently pushed me back toward the door. Go home, honey, let us handle this. You'll only make things harder. I stood outside the ICU, watching through the glass as my family surrounded my grandfather's bed. The man who'd shown up for every important moment of my life. The man who'd driven 2 hours in the dark because I broke my arm. The man who'd made me feel seen. And I wasn't allowed to say goodbye. I pressed my hand against the glass, watching as the monitors flatlined, as nurses rushed in, as my family stepped back to give them room. I watched my grandfather die from outside, separated by a door and a family that had decided I wasn't essential enough to be included in his final moments. When it was over, when the nurses finally stopped and stepped back, when Mom covered her face and Derek put his arm around her, when Dad signed whatever paperwork they handed him, that's when they finally opened the door. You can go in now, a nurse told me gently. But it was too late. I'd missed it. I'd missed everything that mattered. I walked into that room, approached the bed, and took Grandpa's still warm hand. I'm so sorry, I whispered. I'm so sorry I wasn't here. Derek spoke from behind me. Don't make this about you, Madison. Grandpa needed a calm environment in his final moments, not drama. You'll understand when you're older. I was 28 years old. I'd lived through years of being treated like I didn't matter. But in that moment, standing next to my grandfather's body, being told I'd caused drama by wanting to say goodbye, that's when something inside me shattered completely. I wasn't sad anymore. I wasn't hurt. I was empty. That's when I finally understood what Grandpa had been trying to tell me all along. I didn't need their approval. I didn't need their love. I didn't need them to see me. I just needed to stop expecting them to. 1 week after the funeral, I received an email from Holbrook & Associates, Grandpa's law firm. The subject line read, "Will reading for William Carter. Mandatory attendance required." Mandatory. That word struck me as odd. Grandpa had never mandated anything in his life. He'd always been the type to suggest, to guide, to recommend, never to demand. I called my father to ask about it. He picked up on the 4th ring, his voice clipped and impatient. "Dad, did you get an email about Grandpa's will reading?" "Yes, Madison, we all did. It's scheduled for next Monday at 10. "Why does it say mandatory?" "How should I know? Your grandfather probably wanted to make sure everyone showed up. He was always theatrical like that." He paused. "Look, I don't want to get your hopes up. Grandpa left you some things, I'm sure. Maybe his book collection or that old desk you liked. But the bulk of the estate, the company, the properties, the real assets, that's going to Derek. It's what makes sense. Derek has the business degree, the financial acumen. You understand that, right?" I understood perfectly. Even in death, I was expected to accept the scraps while Derek inherited the kingdom. "I'll be there," I said. "Good. Try to look presentable. This is a formal proceeding, not one of your casual freelance meetings." He hung up before I could respond. Monday morning arrived cold and grey. I stood outside the Holbrook and Associates building in downtown Manhattan, trying to calm the anxiety crawling up my throat. The building was all glass and steel, the kind of place where fortunes were made and broken with the stroke of a pen. I walked into the lobby, gave my name to the receptionist, and was directed to the 14th floor. The elevator ride felt like it lasted an hour. When the doors opened, I was greeted by an assistant who led me down a corridor lined with expensive art and leather-bound books. We arrived at a conference room with frosted glass doors. Through the blur, I could see figures already inside. The assistant opened the door, and I stepped into what felt like an ambush. The conference room was enormous, dominated by a long mahogany table that could have seated 20 people. But what caught my attention immediately were the cameras. 2 professional cameramen stood in opposite corners, their equipment pointed at the table, red recording lights already blinking. "Why are there cameras?" I asked the assistant quietly. She gave me a polite smile that revealed nothing. "Mr. Carter's request, ma'am." Derek and Ashley were already seated halfway down the table, positioned like they owned the place. Derek wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my rent. Ashley looked like she'd stepped out of a fashion magazine, her blonde hair perfectly styled, her manicured nails drumming impatiently on the table. My parents sat at what I assumed was the head of the table. Dad in his navy pinstripe, Mum in a black Chanel suit she'd probably bought specifically for this occasion. She looked less like a grieving daughter-in-law and more like a CEO about to close a merger. When I walked in, no one looked up. No one said hello. It was like I'd entered a room full of strangers, not family. I chose a seat near the door, at the far end of the table, the place where you sit when you're not really supposed to be there, the place I'd occupied my entire life. That's when Mum finally acknowledged my existence. She turned in her chair, looked at me over her reading glasses, and said in a voice that carried across the entire room, "Madison, honey, I think you should sit over there." She gestured vaguely toward a small side table near the wall, the kind you'd use for extra coffee cups or documents, not people. "This table is for immediate family." Immediate family. The words hung in the air like a guillotine blade. Derek smirked. "Mum, let her stay. I mean, Grandpa probably left her something. Maybe his stamp collection or that old watch he used to wear. She should be here for that at least." Ashley leaned over to whisper something to Derek, but she spoke just loud enough for me to hear. "Honestly, I think she's only here because your grandfather felt guilty. You know, pity, inheritance." They laughed. Not loud, dramatic laughter. Worse, the quiet, knowing chuckles of people who genuinely believe they're better than you. I stayed frozen in my chair, staring at the wood grain of the table, trying to remember how to breathe. That's when Mum delivered the final blow. She turned to Dad, but her voice projected across the room, ensuring everyone, including me, could hear clearly. "She's not even really family. William spoiled her too much. She wouldn't even be here if he hadn't been so soft. Not even family. 28 years of my life, and I'd just been officially excommunicated with 6 words." Derek laughed again. Ashley covered her mouth, pretending to be scandalized, but clearly entertained. Dad said nothing, which was somehow worse than agreeing. The cameras caught everything, the laughter, Mum's casual dismissal, my face as I processed being erased from my own family tree in real time. I wanted to stand up. I wanted to leave. I wanted to scream that I'd spent my entire life being treated like a mistake, and I was done apologizing for existing. But I didn't do any of those things. I sat there, hands folded in my lap, eyes fixed on nothing, and waited for this nightmare to end. That's when I noticed the man in the corner. Not one of the cameramen. Someone else. Older, maybe 60, in an expensive grey suit, watching the entire scene with an expression I couldn't quite read. He caught my eye and gave me the smallest nod, like he was acknowledging something important. I had no idea who he was. I had no idea that in the next 30 minutes my entire life would be rewritten. The door opened, and a man in his 60s entered carrying a worn leather briefcase that looked older than I was. He had silver hair, sharp eyes, and the bearing of someone who'd spent decades dealing with wealthy families and their complicated dynamics. "Good morning," he said, his voice commanding immediate attention. "I'm Thomas Holbrook, senior partner. I'll be conducting the reading of William Carter's last will and testament." Behind him entered another man, the one who'd been watching from the corner. Holbrook gestured to him. "This is Philip Reynolds, CFO of Carter Holdings and the executor of Mr. Carter's estate." Philip Reynolds. I'd heard Grandpa mention him before. They'd worked together for over 30 years. He took a seat at the opposite end of the table from my parents, and I noticed he positioned himself so he had a clear view of everyone. Holbrook opened his briefcase and removed 2 thick folders. One had Derek's name written on the tab. The other had mine. My stomach dropped. 2 folders, not one massive folder for the immediate family, and a thin envelope for me. 2 equal folders. Holbrook set them on the table carefully, then looked directly at the cameras. "This proceeding is being recorded per Mr. William Carter's explicit instructions. Everything said in this room is legally binding and will be part of the official record." Dad shifted impatiently in his chair. "Tom, we appreciate the formality, but Derek and I have a board meeting at 11. Can we expedite this?" Holbrook looked at my father with the expression of a man who dealt with entitled clients for 40 years and had long ago run out of patience for it. "Mr. Carter, I'm afraid that won't be possible. Your father was extraordinarily specific about how this reading must be conducted. We'll proceed according to his wishes, not your schedule." Mum jumped in, her voice dripping with forced sweetness. "Of course, Thomas, we understand. We just want to make sure everything is handled properly. Richard is simply concerned about the company. You know how it is." "I do know how it is," Holbrook said, and something in his tone suggested he knew far more than any of them wanted him to. He opened the first folder, the one with Derek's name, and began to read. "I, William Henry Carter, being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare this to be my last will and testament." Standard opening. Everyone settled in for what they assumed would be a predictable distribution of wealth. The total value of my estate, including Carter Holdings shares, real estate holdings, investment portfolios, and liquid assets, is approximately $45 million. Ashley actually gasped. Derek grinned. Mom squeezed Dad's hand like they'd just won the lottery. 45 million. I'd known Grandpa was wealthy, but hearing the number spoken aloud made it real in a way it hadn't been before. Holbrook continued, his voice steady and professional. "I'll begin with specific bequests to individual family members." Here it comes, I thought. The part where Derek gets the company, the houses, the investments. The part where I get the desk and the stamp collection and a pat on the head for showing up. To my son, Richard Carter, I leave the family lake house in Montana, including all furnishings and the surrounding 10 acres, as well as my vintage automobile collection, currently stored at the Westchester facility. Total estimated value, $2.3 million. Dad nodded, satisfied. The lake house was beautiful, and the car collection included a 1967 Shelby Cobra that was worth at least $500,000 alone. To my daughter-in-law, Patricia Carter, I leave my shares in Carter Pharmaceuticals, held in trust since 1998, currently valued at $1.7 million. These shares will mature in 3 years. Mum smiled. She'd just secured a retirement nest egg. To my grandson, Derek Carter, everyone leaned forward. This was the moment, the big reveal, the coronation of the golden child. I leave $50,000 in cash and my medical library collection, currently housed in the study of my Lakeview Drive residence. Silence. Absolute, crushing silence. Derek's face went from confident to confused to horrified in the span of 3 seconds. Wait, what? Ashley's hand flew to her mouth. There must be a mistake. Dad stood up. Tom, you need to read that again. 50,000? That's it? Holbrook didn't even blink. I assure you, there is no error. Should I continue? Mum's voice came out strangled. The company's shares. What about Derek's position as future CEO? William promised... Mrs. Carter, Holbrook interrupted, his tone glacial. Your father-in-law promised nothing. Derek Carter is not mentioned in any succession plans for Carter Holdings. Now, may I continue? Derek looked like he'd been punched. This is insane. Grandpa owned a $45 million estate. I'm his only grandson. Where's the rest? Holbrook turned a page, and I saw him glance at the folder with my name on it. Oh no, oh God, no. Whatever was happening, I suddenly didn't want to be in this room when it was revealed. To my granddaughter, Madison Rose Carter. Every head in the room turned to look at me. I leave the following: the entirety of my 67% controlling shares in Carter Holdings, currently valued at $22 million. The primary residence at 847 Lakeview Drive, including all furnishings, artwork, and grounds, valued at $8.2 million. The complete investment portfolio currently managed by Fidelity Investments, valued at $6.1 million. All remaining liquid assets, including savings, money market accounts, and certificates of deposit, totaling approximately $2.1 million. He looked up from the document directly at me. Total estimated value of inheritance, $38.4 million. I stopped breathing. Derek shot to his feet. That's impossible! Ashley's face had gone completely white. Mum looked like she was about to be sick. Dad was frozen, his mouth hanging open. Holbrook stood up, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute authority. Ms. Madison Carter, per your grandfather's explicit instructions, you are required to take the seat at the head of this table, the chairman's seat. I couldn't move. My legs had turned to concrete. My brain couldn't process what was happening. Ms. Carter, Holbrook repeated, please take your grandfather's chair. Philip Reynolds stood up from his position at the end of the table, gesturing to the empty chair at the head, the chairman's seat. The seat my mother had been sitting next to, assuming it would remain empty, or that Derek would eventually occupy it. Derek exploded. This is insane! She's a freelance graphic designer. She doesn't have a business degree. She can't run a company. Grandpa must have been out of his mind. Dad slammed his hand on the table. Tom, this will is invalid. Dad was clearly suffering from dementia or was manipulated. We're contesting this immediately. Mum stood up, pointing at me like I was on trial. She doesn't even have any business experience. This company will collapse in 6 months. Philip Reynolds' voice cut through the chaos like a knife. Mr. Carter, Mrs. Carter, Derek. He spoke each name like a judge pronouncing sentence. William Carter was of completely sound mind. I personally witnessed this will being updated 6 months ago, along with Dr. Alan Martinez, Mr. Carter's physician, and 2 independent medical evaluators. Every decision was calculated, deliberate, and legally bulletproof. He walked toward me, and I realized he was carrying something. An envelope. "Miss Carter, your grandfather left specific instructions that this letter be read aloud, in this room, at this moment." My hands were shaking as I took the envelope. The cameras zoomed in. Everyone was staring. I could barely see through the tears forming in my eyes. "Out loud," Philip said gently. He wanted them to hear it. I opened the envelope. Inside was a single page, handwritten in Grandpa's distinctive script, the same handwriting I'd seen on recipe cards, birthday notes, and the back of photographs my entire life. I started reading, my voice barely above a whisper. "My dearest Madison, if you're reading this, I'm gone." My voice broke. I couldn't do this. "Keep going," Philip said quietly. "He needs you to finish." I took a shaky breath and continued. "But I made sure you'd never be invisible again. I watched them dismiss you for 28 years. I watched you build yourself into someone extraordinary, not despite their rejection, but without needing their validation. You didn't need my money, Madison. You needed the world to see what I always saw. You're not the spare. You're the legacy. Take the chair, Madison. It's always been yours. All my love, Grandpa." The room was dead silent, except for my quiet crying. I folded the letter carefully, held it against my chest for a moment, then looked up. Philip was standing beside the chairman's seat at the head of the table, waiting. Mum started to say something, but Philip cut her off with a look. I stood up. My legs felt like they might give out, but I forced myself to walk, past Derek, whose face had gone from red to grey, past Ashley, who wouldn't meet my eyes, past my parents, who looked like their entire world had just collapsed. I reached the chairman's seat. The leather was still warm from where my mother had been sitting 20 minutes ago, back when she thought her family's fortune was secure. I sat down. The cameras captured everything. Philip gave me a small nod. Holbrook made a note in his folder. Derek put his head in his hands. Mum stared at me like I'd become something she didn't recognize. And for the first time in my entire life, I was sitting at the head of the table. The chairman's seat felt both too big and exactly right. I sat there, hands folded on the table, trying to process that I was now in control of a $45 million empire while my family stared at me like I'd just committed a crime. Derek was the first to completely lose it. He shot up from his chair so violently it scraped across the floor. "You manipulated him, an old man with a weak heart. You played on his emotions, made him think—" "Mr. Carter?" Holbrook interrupted, his voice sharp as glass. "I'd advise you to be very careful with your accusations. This proceeding is being recorded, and slander is actionable." Ashley grabbed Derek's arm, trying to pull him back down, but he shook her off. "She's been playing victim her entire life to get this. The quiet one, the overlooked one, the one Grandpa felt sorry for. It was all an act." I sat there, absorbing his words like blows. Part of me wanted to defend myself. Part of me wanted to scream that I'd never asked Grandpa for anything. But a larger part of me, the part that had survived 28 years of this, knew that defending myself would only prove their point. So I said nothing. I just looked at Derek and I let him see exactly how much his words cost me. Mum stood up next, and I recognized her strategy immediately, the tears, the wounded mother routine. She'd used it on me 1,000 times before. "Madison, sweetheart, you're family. You're our daughter." Her voice cracked perfectly, right on cue. We've raised you for 28 years. You can't possibly think taking everything your grandfather built, everything your father was supposed to inherit. You can't think that's right, can you?" "Back said I wasn't family 10 minutes ago," I said quietly. "In front of 50 people and 2 cameras. You said I was not even really family." "Which is it, Mom?" Her face flushed red. "I was joking. You misunderstood. Surely you're not going to hold one comment against your own mother." "One comment?" I felt something crack open inside me. "Mum, you seated me at the kids' table at Thanksgiving. You forgot me at the hospital when I broke my arm. You didn't come to my graduation. One comment?" "Oh, don't be so dramatic," she snapped, the mask slipping. "We had priorities. Derek had important commitments. Your father and I can't be everywhere at once." "You weren't anywhere for me, not once." Dad finally spoke up, and his approach was pure intimidation. He stood, buttoning his suit jacket, like he was about to deliver a closing argument. "Tom, we're contesting this will. Clearly, Madison used undue influence on a vulnerable elderly man. We'll have this overturned within the month." Holbrook didn't even look concerned. "Mr. Carter, your father anticipated this reaction. That's precisely why he took extraordinary measures." He pulled out his laptop, turned it to face the room. "Mr. William Carter recorded a video testimony 6 months ago, witnessed by 3 professionals, all of whom evaluated his mental competency. Would you like to see it?" The room went silent. Derek slowly sat back down. Mum's hand flew to her throat. "Yes," Dad said, but his voice had lost its confidence. "We want to see it." Philip Reynolds stood up, moved to dim the light slightly, and nodded at Holbrook. "Play it." The laptop screen flickered to life, and there he was, Grandpa, sitting in his favourite leather chair in the study, the one with the brass reading lamp beside it. He looked exactly as I remembered him, white hair combed back, reading glasses perched on his nose, the slight smile that always made me feel safe. Seeing him alive, hearing his voice, it broke something in me. I gripped the arms of the chairman's seat to keep from falling apart. "My name is William Henry Carter," Grandpa said, his voice clear and strong. "I am 76 years old, of sound mind, and I'm recording this on March 15th with my attorney Thomas Holbrook, my CFO Philip Reynolds, and Dr. Alan Martinez, who will confirm I have full cognitive capacity." The camera panned briefly to show all 3 men sitting off to the side, each nodding in confirmation. Grandpa continued, "I'm making this video because I know my son Richard and my grandson Derek will contest my will. They'll claim Madison manipulated me. They'll say I was senile, confused, or coerced. So let me be absolutely clear about my reasoning." He leaned forward, and the intensity in his eyes made it impossible to look away. "I've watched my family treat Madison like a burden for 28 years. I watched them exclude her, diminish her, make her feel like she had to apologize for existing. I watched her achieve extraordinary things, graduate with honors, build a successful business from nothing, become a genuinely kind and thoughtful person, and I watched them treat those achievements like they were embarrassments." Derek made a strangled sound. Ashley had her hand over her mouth. "Derek," Grandpa said, looking directly at the camera like he could see into this room, into this moment. "You asked me to fund your medical practice startup. I gave you $200,000. You sold that practice 2 years later for a profit and bought a lake house in the Poconos. You never paid me back. You never even thanked me." Derek's face had gone completely white. "Richard," Grandpa continued, "you asked me to bail out your commercial real estate investment when it went south. $350,000. You promised you'd pay me back when things turned around. That was 8 years ago. I'm still waiting. Dad couldn't meet anyone's eyes. Mom looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. Patricia, you once told me at a family dinner that Madison was difficult because she didn't want to pursue medicine like Derek. You said, and I quote, "It would be easier if we just had one child." You said this while Madison was in the next room doing dishes. She was 17 years old. Mom made a choking sound. I never. I have witnesses, Grandpa said calmly on the screen. I documented everything, every loan I gave that was never repaid. Every time Madison was excluded from family events, every cruel comment, every dismissal, every moment you made her feel like she was less than. He paused, took off his glasses, and wiped them carefully. When he put them back on, his eyes were sharp with purpose. Madison is the only person in this family who never asked me for a single thing. Not money, not favours, not validation. She visited me every Sunday, not because I was wealthy, but because I was her grandfather. When she broke her arm and her parents didn't come to the hospital, I drove 2 hours in the middle of the night. Not because she asked me to, because that's what family does. Grandpa leaned back in his chair. This company, this legacy, it doesn't need someone who wants it for the power or the money. It needs someone who understands what it means to build something with integrity. Madison is that person. He looked directly into the camera one final time. Derek, Richard, Patricia, if you're watching this and you're angry, good. Maybe anger will make you finally see what I've been seeing for decades. Madison was never your problem, your inability to see her value. That was always your failure, not hers. The video ended. The screen went black. The only sound in the room was Mom's quiet crying and Derek's heavy breathing. Philip stood up, closed the laptop, and turned the lights back up. That testimony was witnessed by 3 professionals. Dr. Martinez evaluated Mr. Carter's cognitive function both before and after the recording. He passed every assessment with flying colours. If you contest this will, this video will be presented in court, along with detailed financial records of every loan Mr. Carter made to Richard and Derek that was never repaid. He looked at Dad. That's approximately $550,000 in documented loans over 15 years, all of which Mr. Carter forgave in his will, by the way. He could have demanded repayment from your inheritances, but he chose not to. Dad sank back into his chair like all the air had gone out of him. Philip turned to me. Ms. Carter, your grandfather also left instructions that this video be uploaded to Carter Holdings' internal employee portal. He wanted every employee to understand the reasoning behind his decision. Do you approve? Every employee, hundreds of people would see this, would see my family's dysfunction laid bare, would know that I'd been chosen not because I manipulated anyone, but because I was the only one who'd never tried to. Yes, I said. My voice didn't shake. Upload it, Mum gasped. You can't. That's private family business. Actually, Holbrook interjected, as chairman and majority shareholder of Carter Holdings, Ms. Carter has full authority to determine what internal communications are distributed to employees. This falls well within her purview. I stood up from the chairman's seat. I felt different somehow, taller, clearer. Philip, I'll need you to prepare transition documents. I want to review the company's current structure, financial statements, and pending projects by end of week. Philip nodded. Of course, Miss Carter. I'll have everything ready for you. I looked at Derek. Grandpa left you his medical library. It's over 3,000 books. He spent 50 years collecting them. I hope you actually read them this time instead of using them as office decoration. Derek couldn't even respond. He just stared at me like he'd never seen me before. I turned to Mom. Patricia, the pharmaceutical shares Grandpa left you will mature in 3 years, as Holbrook said. The current value is $1.7 million. If you hold them, they'll be worth considerably more. I suggest you don't sell them early, just to fund a vacation home or a new car. Mom's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. Finally, I looked at Dad. The lake house in Montana is beautiful. Grandpa loved it there. I hope it brings you some peace. I picked up Grandpa's letter from the table, folded it carefully, and put it in my purse. Then I walked toward the door. Madison, Dad called out. I stopped but didn't turn around. You can't just walk away from this family. I looked back over my shoulder. I'm not walking away, Dad. I'm just finally walking forward. There's a difference. We raised you, he said, and there was desperation in his voice now. We gave you everything. You owe us. I don't owe you anything, I said. You gave Derek everything. You gave me survival, and I'm grateful for that, actually, because survival taught me something privilege never could, how to stand on my own. I walked out of that conference room with cameras still rolling, past the receptionist, who wisely said nothing, into the elevator, and I didn't cry. I didn't break down. I rode down 14 floors in silence, walked through the marble lobby and out into the Manhattan afternoon. It was only when I reached my car, parked 3 blocks away, that I finally let myself feel it. I sat in the driver's seat, hands shaking on the steering wheel, and I called the one person who'd always understood. Nora answered on the second ring. Madison, how did it go? He left me everything, I whispered. Nora, he left me everything. Oh my God. $38 million. The company, the house, everything. There was a long pause. Then Nora said, How are you feeling? And that's when I started crying, not sad crying, not angry crying, something else entirely. Relief, maybe, or vindication, or grief for all the years I'd spent thinking I wasn't enough. I don't know, I admitted. I don't know what I'm feeling. Come over, Nora said immediately. Come to my place. You shouldn't be alone right now. But I didn't go to Nora's. I drove to Grandpa's house instead, my house now, on Lakeview Drive. I parked in the circular driveway, used the key I'd had since I was 16, and walked through the front door into the foyer that smelled like old books and furniture polish. The house was exactly as I remembered it. The grandfather clock in the hallway, the photographs on the walls, including several of me that my parents had never bothered to frame. The study where Grandpa had recorded that video, the leather chair still positioned by the window. I sat in that chair, in the last place Grandpa had sat when he was alive, and I understood what he'd done. He hadn't just left me money, he'd left me proof that I mattered, proof that someone had seen me, really seen me, and decided I was worth everything. My phone buzzed. Text message from Derek. We need to talk. Then Mom. Please call me. We need to discuss this as a family. Then Dad. Madison, don't make any rash decisions. Let's meet tomorrow. I turned my phone off. 1 week passed before they tried again. 7 days of blessed silence while I met with Philip, reviewed company documents, and started understanding exactly what I'd inherited. Carter Holdings wasn't just a manufacturing company anymore. It had diversified into medical supplies, sustainable packaging, and tech logistics. Grandpa had built something impressive. Philip walked me through everything with patience and clarity. Your grandfather spent the last year preparing for this transition, he explained during one of our meetings. He knew you'd need support. He structured everything so that you'd have full control, but with advisors in place who believe in his vision. Did you know he was going to do this? I asked. I knew he was considering it. When he asked me to be executor, he told me why. He said, "Philip, I'm giving this company to the one person who never saw it as an inheritance. She'll see it as a responsibility." On day 8, my phone rang. Patricia. I let it go to voicemail. She called back immediately. I let it ring again. On the third call, I finally answered. "Hi, Mom." "Madison." Her voice was thick with emotion. Real or performed, I couldn't tell any more. "Thank God. I've been so worried. You haven't returned any of our calls." "I've been busy." Of course, I understand. This must be overwhelming for you." She paused and I could hear her recalibrating, searching for the right approach. "Sweetheart, I need you to know that I've been doing a lot of thinking this week about what I said at the will reading, about everything." I waited. "I was wrong," she said. "I was hurt and confused and I lashed out. But Madison, you're my daughter. You'll always be my daughter. And I'm so sorry for making you feel like you weren't part of this family." "Thank you for the apology," I said, keeping my voice neutral. Can we have dinner? Just you and me? I want to talk, really talk. Not about the money or the company, just about us, about our relationship." "When?" "Tonight?" She sounded hopeful, almost desperate. "I could cook that pasta dish you used to love, the one with the sun-dried tomatoes." The pasta dish she'd made exactly twice in my entire childhood, both times when Derek brought home straight A's and she was in a celebratory mood. "I don't think that's a good idea right now," I said carefully. "Please, Madison, I'm your mother. I raised you. Don't I deserve a chance to make this right?" And there it was, the guilt trip, the implied debt, the suggestion that I owed her something because she'd performed the basic function of parenting. "Mom, you called me not even family 8 days ago, in front of witnesses, on camera. An apology doesn't erase that." "I told you I was joking. You've always been too sensitive." She caught herself, but too late. "I mean, you've always taken things too personally. You know how I am. I say things I don't mean when I'm stressed." "You meant it," I said. "You've always meant it. This isn't about one comment, Mom. It's about 28 years of comments. 28 years of being forgotten and excluded and treated like I was a mistake you were stuck dealing with." "That's not fair, isn't it? You forgot me at school when I was 14 because you were busy taking Derek to buy a suit. You missed my graduation because Derek had surgery. You didn't come to the hospital when I broke my arm. At what point does a pattern become undeniable?" Silence. Then quietly, "What do you want from me?" "I don't want anything from you. That's the point. I've stopped waiting for you to see me." "So you're going to cut us off? Turn your back on your family? All because of some hurt feelings?" "No, Mom. I'm going to live my life without needing your approval. You can be part of that life if you choose to see me as a person instead of a disappointment. But I'm not going to keep begging you to love me the way you love Derek." "I love you both the same." "No, you don't. And that's okay. I've made peace with it. The question is, can you?" I hung up before she could answer. 10 days after the will reading, Derek showed up at the Carter Holdings building. I was in my new office, Grandpa's old office, which felt both sacred and terrifying, when my assistant called up. "Miss Carter, your brother is here. He doesn't have an appointment, but he says it's urgent." I closed my laptop. "Send him up." Derek walked into the office 3 minutes later, and I barely recognized him. He wasn't wearing his usual designer suit. Instead, he had on jeans and a wrinkled button-down. His hair wasn't perfectly styled. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. "Madison." "Derek." He stood in the middle of the office, looking around like he was cataloguing everything he thought should have been his. The mahogany desk, the view of the city, the power. "Nice office," he said. It was Grandpa's. "I know, I've been here before. He used to bring me here when I was a kid, show me around, tell me about the business." He laughed bitterly. "I thought he was grooming me. Turns out he was just, I don't know, spending time with his grandson." I didn't say anything. Derek moved to the window, looked out at Manhattan stretching below. Ashley left me. "I'm sorry." "Are you?" He turned to face me. "She left 3 days after the will reading, said she didn't sign up to be married to a doctor with 50 grand in inheritance and a library of old books. She signed up for the Carter fortune." "That's horrible, Derek. I really am sorry." "Are you?" he repeated, and there was anger in his voice now. "Because you got everything. You got the money, the company, the house, the respect, and I got humiliated in front of cameras and abandoned by my wife. I didn't ask for any of this. Didn't you?" He stepped closer. All those years playing the victim, the forgotten daughter, the overlooked child. You manipulated Grandpa into feeling sorry for you. Is that really what you think happened? What else am I supposed to think? I'm the one who went to medical school. I'm the one who built a practice. I'm the one who worked 80-hour weeks trying to make Dad proud, and you just existed. You drew pictures on your computer and visited an old man on Sundays, and somehow that was enough. I stood up from behind the desk. "You want to know why Grandpa chose me? It wasn't because I was forgotten. It was because I never asked to be remembered. I didn't visit him because I wanted something. I visited him because I loved him. Can you say the same?" Derek's jaw clenched. "Of course I loved him." "Did you? Or did you love what he could give you? The money, the status, the approval?" "That's not fair." "You asked him to fund your practice. You asked him for loans. You asked him for advice on investments." "I never asked him for anything, Derek. Not once. And that's the difference." He looked at me for a long moment, and I saw something crack in his expression. "I need your help." "With what?" "I need a job. At Carter Holdings, I have medical expertise. I could consult on the healthcare supply division, help with strategic planning for the medical equipment line. I'd be an asset." "No." The word hung in the air like a sentence. "No?" Derek looked stunned. "Madison, I'm your brother. You were my brother when I needed you at the hospital and you didn't come. You were my brother at the will reading when you called me a manipulator in front of 50 people. You were my brother every time you chose their approval over defending me. I made mistakes. I'm admitting that. But you can't just abandon family. I'm not abandoning you, Derek. I'm refusing to rescue you. There's a difference." His voice rose. "You're being vindictive. You got everything, and now you're punishing me for—" "For what?" I interrupted. "For treating me like garbage my entire life? For laughing when Mum said I wasn't family? For never, not once standing up for me? I was stupid. I was insecure. Do you want me to beg?" His voice cracked. "Fine, I'm begging. Please, Madison. Ashley's gone. Mum and Dad won't even look at me anymore because I'm not the golden child they thought I was. I have nothing. No wife, no money, no respect. Just a medical degree and $50,000 that won't last 6 months in this city. Then leave the city." "What?" "You have $50,000 and a medical degree. Go somewhere that needs doctors. Open a practice in a rural area where you can actually help people instead of chasing prestige. Use that medical library Grandpa left you and remember why you wanted to be a doctor in the first place. You're serious. Completely. Grandpa gave you exactly what you needed, Derek. Just like he gave me what I needed. The difference is, I'm grateful. You're entitled." Derek stared at me like I'd become someone he didn't recognize. "You've changed." "No," I said. "I finally stopped pretending to be smaller so you could feel bigger. That's not change. That's growth." He stood there for another moment, then walked to the door. He stopped with his hand on the handle. "I hope you're happy, Madison. I hope being right was worth destroying this family." "I didn't destroy this family," I said quietly. "I just stopped holding it together by myself." He left. I sat back down at Grandpa's desk, my desk, and I didn't cry. I felt sad, but I also felt something else: relief, freedom, the weight of always trying to earn love from people who'd already decided I wasn't worth it. That weight was gone. 3 weeks after the will reading, Thanksgiving arrived. I received an email from Dad. The subject line: Family Thanksgiving. "Madison, it's been a difficult month for all of us. Your mother and I would like to invite you to Thanksgiving dinner at our home. We believe it's time for the family to move past this situation and begin healing. Derek will be attending. We think it's important that we come together as a family during this holiday season. Dinner is at 6 p.m. Please let us know if you'll be joining us. Dad." I read it 3 times, then I deleted it. 2 hours later, Dad called. I let it ring twice before answering. "Hi, Dad." "Madison, did you get my email?" "I did." "And? Will you be joining us?" "No." There was a pause. "I'm sorry, what?" "I'm not coming to Thanksgiving." "Madison, this is ridiculous. We're your family. You can't just—" "Actually, I can. I have other plans." "Other plans? With who?" "With people who choose to see me, Dad. Novel concept, I know." His voice hardened. "You're being childish. You're holding a grudge over one comment your mother made in a stressful situation." It wasn't one comment. It was 28 years of comments. 28 years of being treated like I was tolerated, not loved, not wanted, not valued. "We gave you everything. We put a roof over your head, food on your table, paid for your education." "You gave Derek everything," I interrupted. "You gave me the bare minimum and expected me to be grateful for not being abandoned completely. And you know what? I was grateful. For years I was so desperate for your approval that I would have thanked you for scraps. But I'm done now. I'm done begging you to love me the way you love Derek." "So you're just going to cut us off? Walk away from your family like we mean nothing?" "No, Dad. I'm doing exactly what you taught me my entire life. I'm choosing the people who choose me, and you never chose me, not once." "That's not true." "When I graduated with honors, you didn't come because Derek had surgery. When I broke my arm, you didn't come because you were at Derek's charity gala. When Grandpa was dying and I was standing outside the ICU, you wouldn't let me in because I would make things harder. At what point do I get to stop accepting that Derek's life is more important than mine? We had to prioritize. I know. You did prioritize. And your priorities told me everything I needed to know about where I ranked in this family. So now I'm making my own priorities, and neither of you are on the list. You're being selfish." I laughed. Actually laughed. "I'm being selfish. I spent 28 years bending myself into shapes trying to earn your love. I accepted being forgotten, excluded, dismissed and humiliated because I kept hoping that eventually, if I was just good enough, you'd see me. And now that I've stopped performing, I'm selfish? Madison, I have to go, Dad. Have a nice Thanksgiving." I hung up. That night, I hosted Thanksgiving at my house, at Grandpa's house. I invited Philip Reynolds and his wife. Thomas Holbrook came with his daughter. Nora brought her fiancé. I invited 3 employees from Carter Holdings who'd reached out with genuine congratulations and support. We sat around Grandpa's dining table, the one I'd helped him pick out 15 years ago, and we shared food and stories and laughter that wasn't performed or strategic. It was real. Philip raised his glass. "I'd like to propose a toast. To Madison, who inherited more than a company, she inherited integrity, and to William, who knew exactly what he was doing." Everyone raised their glasses. To Madison, to William. I looked around the table at these people who'd chosen to be here, who wanted to celebrate with me not because of what I could give them, but because of who I was. And I felt something I hadn't felt in 28 years. I felt like I belonged. 6 months passed like a dream. Carter Holdings thrived under my leadership, not because I was some business genius, but because I listened. I listened to Philip's decades of experience. I listened to department heads who'd been ignored under previous management. I listened to employees on the factory floor who had ideas that no one had bothered to ask about. Revenue increased 18%. Employee satisfaction surveys showed a 27% improvement. We secured 3 major new contracts that had been stalling for years. Forbes called and asked for an interview. I sat in my office, finally feeling like it was actually my office, talking to a reporter about how a freelance graphic designer ended up running a $45 million company. "You went from being told you weren't even family to becoming chairman in a single day," the reporter said. "How did you do it?" I thought about that question, really thought about it. "I stopped waiting for permission to exist," I said finally. "My grandfather didn't give me this company because I was perfect. He gave it to me because I survived being treated like I wasn't enough, and I still became someone worth believing in. He saw that strength when no one else did, including me. Do you regret cutting ties with your family?" I didn't cut ties. I stopped letting them define my worth. There's a difference. They can be part of my life if they choose to see me as a person instead of a disappointment. But I'm not going to keep begging them to love me. The article published 2 weeks later. It went viral. I received hundreds of messages from people who'd felt invisible in their own families, people who'd been the scapegoat, the afterthought, the one who never quite measured up. I created the William Carter Foundation the next month, a scholarship fund for students who'd been dismissed by their families but refused to give up on themselves. The first year, we funded 20 full-ride scholarships. Philip helped me structure it. Thomas handled the legal framework. And every single recipient got a personal letter from me telling them what Grandpa had told me. You don't need anyone's permission to be extraordinary. Derek, I heard through distant family connections, had moved to Montana. He'd opened a small practice in a rural area using his $50,000. Word was he was actually good at it, actually helping people. I hoped it was true. Mom and Dad sold the lake house. Couldn't afford the mortgage, apparently. They were living off Patricia's pharmaceutical shares, which had matured nicely because she'd listened to my advice and held them. We hadn't spoken in 5 months. I missed them sometimes, but I didn't miss the person I had to become to earn their attention. Every Sunday, I visited Grandpa's grave. I'd bring coffee, his favourite, black with 1 sugar, and I'd sit on the bench nearby and tell him about my week, about the company, about the foundation, about the life I was building with his gift. "I hope I'm making you proud," I said on one of those Sundays. "I hope you know that this wasn't about the money. It was never about the money." The wind rustled through the trees. Somewhere nearby, a bird sang. And I felt as clearly as I'd ever felt anything that he knew. I drove home that afternoon to my house on Lakeview Drive, the house that used to be Grandpa's and was now mine. I made dinner in the kitchen where he'd taught me to cook. I read in the study where he'd recorded that video. And I felt, for the first time in my entire life, completely at peace. My phone buzzed. A text from Nora. "Dinner this weekend? Want you to meet someone?" I smiled and texted back. "Definitely. Your place or mine?" "Yours. I want to see what you've done with the garden." I looked out the window at the garden I'd been restoring. Grandpa had loved that garden, but in his last years he hadn't been able to maintain it. I'd spent the last 3 months replanting, pruning, bringing it back to life. That night I sat in Grandpa's leather chair, my chair now, and I thought about everything that had happened, about being invisible for 28 years, about the will reading that changed everything, about the choice to stop seeking validation from people who'd never planned to give it. If you're watching this and you've ever felt invisible in your own family, I need you to hear this. You are not the problem. You are not too sensitive. You are not asking for too much. You are not imagining the coldness, the comparisons, the dismissals. My grandfather once told me, "Madison, you don't need their approval. You need your own." I didn't understand it then, but I do now. Being rejected by your family doesn't mean you're unlovable. It means they couldn't see your value, and that's their loss, not yours. I'm not going to lie and say it doesn't hurt. It does, every single day, but I'd rather live with the pain of being misunderstood than the suffocation of pretending to be less so they could feel like more. To anyone who's been the scapegoat, the afterthought, the one who was told they weren't even family, you are family. You're my family, and I see you. I closed my eyes and let myself feel it all. The grief, the relief, the freedom, the weight of 28 years finally lifting. Have you ever felt like you didn't belong in your own family? Like you were tolerated, not loved? What would you do if you finally had proof that you were worth something all along? The answer, I'd learned, was simple. You'd finally start living like you believed it. For every Madison who was told they weren't enough, you are. You always were.